Welcome to Social Aloe Ministries, where we are committed to glorifying God while exposing the devil. In this installment of the Prophetic Academy, we're going to speak about the so-called Lone Ranger prophets. Prophets sometimes have a reputation of being loners, and people say that when Jesus sent out his disciples, that he sent them out in a group of pairs, and that a prophet should not go the journey alone. And there are merits to that. Because one of the things a prophet needs is prayer support, a lot of intercession based on spiritual warfare. But a prophet has to have the mentality to go it alone if necessary. And oftentimes the Lord will call a prophet to go what you call against the grain. But even the prophets that we call, or we may think were lone rangers back in the Old Testament times, that wasn't exactly the case. And Lone Ranger is based on the Western series with a Texas Ranger that what they call the Lone Ranger. But he wasn't really alone. He had his horse, that highly disciplined, well-trained horse called Silver. He also had a Native American counterpart called Tonto. So even though they called him a Lone Ranger, he wasn't truly alone. He had support. When you look at the biblical prophets, there are times when they had to do things alone. For example, Micaiah. When Ahab's 400 prophets prophesied to him to let him know that he could go to Ramoth Gilead and he'd be victorious, Jehoshaphat, who was supposed to join him in that battle, asked for a prophet of the Lord, and Micaiah, he showed up alone. 400 prophets prophesied and said that Ahab would be successful, but Micaiah had to go against the grain and let Ahab know that the Lord has sent a lying spirit to deceive his prophets and him to lead him into battle. Now, Ahab sided with his prophets, and he died as a result of it. But Micaiah had to be able to stand his ground and stand alone. And as a prophet, you cannot be swept up by what everyone else is doing. You have to do what the Lord has directed you to do. Elijah. A lot of times we hear about Elijah. On Mount Carmel, we think about him versus 450 false prophets, which is another example of how a prophet of the Lord sometimes has to go against the grain and is often, is even oftentimes outnumbered. You hear about Elijah with the 450 false prophets on Mount Carmel. That's in 1 Kings 18. When Jezebel threatened him in 1 Kings 19, you notice that Elijah, he left the area, and then he left his servant behind. So Elijah had a servant who was with him. Later on, in 1 Kings 19, you see how the Lord had Elijah call Elisha to replace him as a prophet over Israel. However, Elisha spent about 20 years with Elijah. About 20 years with Elijah. So even then, Elijah wasn't alone. You may have heard about Elisha going into Shunem, where the Shunammite woman created a place in her house for him. But he wasn't alone. Later on, you hear about Elisha's servant named Gehazi. So they weren't alone as many people think. And likewise, as a prophet, there are times when people think that you're alone, but that's not even the case. Another one I'll throw in for bonus is Jeremiah. There are times when Jeremiah was thrown into the cistern because people didn't like what he was prophesying. But he had a scribe named Baruch. So even the term Lone Ranger prophet is a misnomer, because the Lone Ranger wasn't truly alone, and the Lord really isn't going to have a prophet out there, what I like to call OTF, out there flapping. So the Lord's going to have some kind of support for the prophet. But at the same time, the Lord conditions a prophet where the prophet will stand against the grain. And throwing even apostles in there. We see how the Lord called Paul as an apostle. In Galatians 1, it talks about the journey, how Paul went to Arabia, and that was for about 14 years. He was in Arabia learning the gospel from Christ. Then he later linked up with other apostles. His first partner was Barnabas. They had a disagreement and they went separate ways. But there was a period where Paul was in the wilderness, or we like to call it in the wilderness, by himself. John the Baptist, he was also in the wilderness before he came out. So a prophet has to have that mentality. of being able to function alone. On probably a final note, for example, when I was in the military, and as of today, I spent about half my life in the military. And I had to be proficient in my individual skills and also had to be able to function as a part of a team. For example, one of the skills was conducting land navigation. When going through a land navigation course, they may give you a plot of land, so to speak, with about 6 points, and you get to choose 3 points. And you get to navigate to and fro for several miles. But there were times when I did land navigation on my own, and then there were times when I had to do land navigation while leading others. But being proficient in an individual skill helped to make me a more valuable member of a team in participating in a collective task. So prophets are not truly lone rangers, but the Lord develops prophets so that they will be able to do things by themselves if necessary, all in accordance with God's will. And sometimes other people will not understand, and the Lord may not make it clear to them. So as a prophet, sometimes you have to be able to go the rest of the journey on your own. And then again, you're never alone, because the Lord is always with you. God bless you.